Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fully Charged Show podcast, where today we're in the rather fabulous Kew Gardens, where we're joined by Ed Miliband, the UK's Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero, the man who is trying to make Britain a clean energy superpower to cut bills, create jobs and deliver security via cheaper zero-carbon electricity by 2030. Or, and depending on which newspaper you read, he's the guy who's the net zero zealot with a messianic devotion to climate action. Now, in this conversation, we're asking, can we really hit clean power by 2030? Why are electricity bills still so high, even after the promises to cut them? Are we on the cusp of deployment of various heat pumps and solar panels? Why are we still talking about carbon capture and storage? And how do we keep the public on side and prevent this becoming such a deeply politicised topic? We're going to get into all of that, but I should caveat two things. First of all, this is a reasonably short conversation. We only had 30 minutes of the Minister's time, so there are so many questions that remain unanswered. We'll have follow-up with round two. And two, we are in a greenhouse, which means that the lighting conditions are challenging and definitely upsetting our videographer. There are, of course, some planes going overhead. And I have to say for myself, I'm rather sweaty. We've teamed up with Duracell Energy to celebrate their brilliant ecosystem of home energy products and their Platinum Homeowner offer by giving away a Duracell Bunny. To win, simply watch to the end and answer a question about Fully Charged. You've got a very clear mandate. Make Britain a clean energy superpower to cut bills, create jobs and deliver security with cheaper zero-carbon electricity by 2030. How do you think you're doing?
Well, I hope I'm doing okay. I don't want to be immodest. Look, we thought a lot about our plan in opposition because I had experience of being in government before, and government is like a whirlwind. Opposition is calmer. And so we thought quite carefully about what was the right mission to have, why was it the right thing for the country, and it came from really a lot from the Russia-Ukraine crisis, where people's bills went through the roof, businesses, families, government ended up paying out lots of money. And so the energy security aspect of that and lower bills, of moving towards renewable electricity, the jobs opportunity, and climate, obviously, which is a long-term interest of mine. And so we sort of, if you like, had the framing and the plan in opposition, and now we're trying to implement it and go as fast as we can in government.
It's so interesting because everything that you describe, job security, lowering bills, all of this sort of stuff is stuff that, should seem completely cross-party, completely partisan, and yet somehow this conversation has become quite politicised, something that I do want to explore as we go through this conversation. But perhaps it's worth, before we get into that, sort of describing what is the scale of the challenge, and particularly with a clean power by 2030, which of course means 95% clean energy in just 6 years. How huge is that challenge?
It's a big challenge. And what we've tried to do in the first year is, within our first 72 hours, we overturned the ban on onshore wind, one of the cheapest forms of power we have as a country. I've approved lots of solar developments, some of which are not that popular, at least in some of those places. We've got now a policy of having solar panels on all new build homes as fitted as standard. That's sort of really, really important. Driving forward with offshore wind, nuclear. It's all of the clean energy we can get. But it's a big challenge. But there's something quite interesting about this, which is if you say we're going to do it in 10 years' time, everybody relaxes. Everybody's like, we've got 10 years, we don't need to worry, we don't really need to go that fast, it'll be fine, and then you end up missing the target. If you say we've got to do it in essentially 5 years, it puts a rocket up the system. And that rocket is so important for us. And having the Prime Minister's authority, it's one of his 5 missions, is really driving it forward. And what's interesting for me is that lots of people in industry, when we first said this about 2 or 3 years ago in opposition, were quite skeptical. And now people are saying, oh God, they really do mean it. They really do mean it. And I think that's kind of important. And there's no time to waste for climate reasons, energy security reasons, and so on.
So interesting because, as you say, it's a rocket up the system, and this is a paradigm shift which requires various components. It needs the carrots, it needs the sticks, it needs the targets, but it also requires a mindset shift as well. And I wonder, you mentioned in there the Future Homes plan, and I'm just going to refer to my notes here so I get this right. So Future Home Standard, that means that all new homes built from 2025 must be highly energy efficient, reducing emissions by 75 to 80% compared to current standards, essentially making them net zero ready. But when we look at what house builders are doing today, apart from a few exceptions, they're not willingly putting solar panels on the roofs. They're not willingly installing heat pumps. How do we encourage that mindset?
Well, you know what's quite interesting about this, because I was looking at the figures on this, I think, I may not get this perfectly right, but I think it's something like 2 in 5 house builders are doing it in the most recent period for which we have data, at least the solar panels. So you're seeing a shift. And what we're going to do, and it will actually be phased in this new policy to give people time to adjust. We're sort of saying, well, everyone now needs to do what the best are doing. And what's so interesting about this, because you say carrots and sticks, I'll be honest, I'm in the carrots department less than the sticks department. Because the solar panels is, in a way, the most simple thing. It's like, what's not to like about the idea that you'd build from the beginning solar panels on rooftops? That means lower bills. We've got this free resource. We've got this great free resource, which is the sun. Why not use it? And why not use it from the get-go, not say, oh, well, after the event, we then have to spend lots of money replacing, putting solar panels on when it'd be so much cheaper to do it from the beginning. So I feel quite strongly that, and I think this is the theme of your podcast too, that we're in the better lives business. We're not in the hair shirt business. This is good for people. It's good for avoiding disaster tomorrow, for future generations. It's a disaster avoidance, definitely, when it comes to the climate crisis, but it's also good for today. It's got to be good for today to get people to come with you, I think.
And the better lives point is really interesting because you can't help but notice so many of these challenges, if tackled in the right way, are totally intersectional. For example, if you have a Future Home Standard with better insulated homes, cheaper electricity, and a heat pump that you can have heating all day, that will have better health outcomes, better economic outcomes for families. Within your department, and this is sort of me probing us, how does this all work? Are you able to have that completely intersectional and joined up way of thinking, or does it still...
The government finds being joined up a challenge. And I think we are getting better. I wouldn't say it's perfect, but that's what we're trying to do. And look, in a way, I think it's partly about the role of politicians, which is to try... I'm a bit of a nerd, right? So I'm always in the detail of policy, but I think the thing I've learned over my political career is, okay, be the nerd if you want to be, but don't squeeze out setting the overall frame and direction. And that's what the civil service is really good at. If you set the overall frame and direction and say, this is where I want to go, people will come with you. At the moment we're thinking, well, how do we do more to roll out solar on rooftops for existing homes? How do we make it worth people's while to do that? And it's so interesting to me that, the lesson I learned most of all is if you give that direction, you can then get the response.
So coming back to some of those bigger systemic challenges, because whenever we look at what's holding back the clean energy transition, it often comes down to mindsets, as we'll come on to, skills and grid connections. And I prepared my notes last week, and then thank goodness, I was keeping an eye on the news yesterday, because yesterday you announced the Connection Accelerator service. Can you tell us what that is and what it's aiming to do?
Well, in order to do that, let me just go back one stage. We've had, because and I think your listeners are very well informed, so and viewers, but so they'll be familiar with this. We've got this big problem in Britain, which is we've had this first come, first served grid process, whereby people essentially get in a queue and get a grid connection date. And that means even the projects that might be the most vital might end up at the back of the queue. So when you think about 2030 clean power that we talked about earlier, you might find a project that's really important to us, but they're being told when you can only connect in 2037. So we're saying, okay, that's enough of that nonsense. We know what we want to achieve. We know broadly the parameters of the different technologies we need, offshore wind, onshore wind, solar, etc. We're going to now have a much more intentional process to say, okay, these are the people who are going to get to the front of the queue because this is what the national interest demands. These other people are going to have to wait a bit longer. Now, What that then opens up is more space by dealing with some of the zombie queue problem, opens up more space not just to get the right power connected for generation, but also, and this is where the Connections Accelerator comes in, also saying to industry that wants to connect, to create good jobs, because it's not just a concern of power generators, it's a concern of industry that they can't get the grid connection. You know, I want to convert to electric arc furnaces. I'm a steel manufacturer. Can I get the connection date I need? I'm a business in another area. I'm a data center. Can I get the connection I need? And so what the Connections Accelerator service does is then says, okay, by reordering the queue to get the right generation we need, we can also open it up to industry.
And if you could be granted a magic wish that would help the delivery of that Connection Accelerator service just be a seamless rollout, what wish would you ask for?
Gosh, that's such a good question. Look, I suppose my wish is always to go faster. Yeah. So I always want things done like that, you know, but because these things are complicated and you've got to make sure that everything balances and so on, it always takes a bit longer than I would like. So I'm always the person saying, well, can't we do that faster? Government has a lot of mechanisms of consultation and feedback and all that. And I think if you're a politician who wants to get things done quickly, that can be quite frustrating. Why do we have to go, you know, I often think, well, why do we have to go through this bureaucratic process? We know what we want to do. Yes, we want to bring people on board and so on, but let's just get on with it. So I think if I had a sort of magic wish, it'd probably be true across the board. It's let's go faster.
Yeah. I was at an event yesterday and there was a representative from the equivalent of the grid or equivalent energy provider in Ukraine. And fingers crossed when the conflict ends, they will be left with one of the most future-proofed, innovative, distributed grids.
Interesting.
And it always seems so sad that innovation comes in times of crisis, when actually, if we have 5 to 6 years, let's use them wisely to go
But
quicker.
I think you're making such an important point here, and I learned a lot from Sir Patrick Vallance, now Lord Vallance, who chaired the vaccines task force. And his point to me was, and we've sort of modelled this a bit for our clean power mission, because we have a clean power mission control, we call it, in a sort of Star Trek type way, that's trying to drive this process. But he always said, look, if you have the authority of the Prime Minister and you have a sort of burning platform, you can really drive things through government. And you know, I think this goes back to this earlier point that if you really set an exacting timetable, you can break through some of the log jams. And you know, it's amazing what human ingenuity and business together and government and civil society can do working together.
The other thing you mentioned there was businesses getting an adequate connection to the grid. Here in the UK, businesses have had the dubious honour of having some of the most expensive electricity in the world. I know that was also something released yesterday in the industrial strategy. How do you foresee the reform in the electricity market and aiding businesses to make this a great place to do business?
Well, look, clean power is crucial to this. Because look, obviously, you know, some businesses face these costs of building the networks we need in the future, and we took some action on that yesterday in the industrial strategy, particularly for the more energy intensive businesses. But the truth is that I was looking at what UK Steel said in response to what we did yesterday, and they said, now the big issue is our exposure to natural gas, the fluctuations. And it's quite interesting for your listeners. We're what you call a price taker, not a price maker when it comes to fossil fuels. So however much fossil fuels we produce, we don't have enough in the North Sea left to change the price. It's all priced on the international market. That's why when Russia-Ukraine happened, when Russia's invasion of Ukraine happened, the price goes through the roof, both for what we produce in the North Sea and what we import. And that's the thing that business is now exposed to. When we've had real instability in relation to Iran, what we're seeing again is these fluctuations in prices. So the best thing we can do is just drive forward with clean power, because then you're taking the jeopardy out. You know, when it comes to renewable auctions or nuclear, it's a fixed price, at least for 15, 20 years. You know, so it's clear sort of what the price is going to be. People can plan on that basis. So that's why clean power is for us so important.
Because with the marginal pricing that we have here in the UK, it's contingent on having enough volume of renewables on the grid so that you're less exposed to the price of natural gas dictating the cost of electricity. Do you think it's valuable to decouple the cost of electricity from gas?
And here, now you've got me right into Nerdsville because this is so exciting. So I can sort of tell you these figures that we've got because they've been crunching through the department. At the moment, natural gas sets the price about 2/3 of the time in the UK. That's the sort of marginal price. And because of the way the different mechanisms work, quite a lot of renewables are associated with that price, even though they're not natural gas, it's renewables, but they take that price. So it means that for the majority of the time, natural gas sets the price for the whole system. In the new world, by 2030, our department estimates that only about 10% of the time, natural gas will set the price of the system, of everything in the system. It'll set the price about 1/3 of the time, but a lot of renewables will be decoupled from that. So that's the scale of gain that clean power can. We're achieving that decoupling because of the mechanisms, the contract for difference mechanisms that we have in place, and that's the key thing. So in other words, not just getting off the power you use being from natural gas, but getting off natural gas, setting that price in that way.
But it seems to me you have two really huge challenges. And I'm sure you have more than two.
At least two.
At least two worry beads. The first is obviously the fact that this has become highly politicized, which we'll come on to next. But the second is that a lot of your job is around expectation management, because 2030 for some seems like a very short period of time away. For others, when they're really struggling with their bills, it feels a lifetime
100%
away.
true.
So how do you square that? How do you bring people on this journey and continue to keep lowering those bills down in a more immediate time frame?
So that's a really great question. So long-term vision or medium-term vision, 2030. In the meantime, what we're quite focused on is how do we take action now? So just give you an example. Recently, last week, the Prime Minister announced, alongside me alongside the Prime Minister, announced that we were going to give an extra discount on energy bills this winter of £150 for 3 million families. There are already about 3 million who got it, and we're extending it basically to another 3 million. It's that kind of action. We're also going to upgrade 5 million homes over the course of the Parliament, energy efficiency, heat pumps and so on. Another 5 million homes families benefiting from lower bills. So the way I think about this is you've got to do this top down, which is dealing with the headline number of the bill, and you drive forward with that through clean power. And at the same time, you take action underneath that for different groups in society, the most vulnerable, people having their homes upgraded. I talked about solar, which is something else we're working on, giving people access to solar, more people access to solar panels. So I think you do both of those things. And what it all amounts to is, let's get the benefits of renewable energy, to people as quickly as possible.
Yeah. There are two things which, if I don't ask these questions, I know that someone in our comments is going to say, excuse me, you did not ask these questions. The first is a quick one. Public charging on electric vehicles, 20% VAT.
Yes.
At home, 5% VAT.
Yes.
What are your thoughts?
I think I'd be sort of vaporized by the Treasury if I said, I agree, we've got to cut the VAT. Look, I know that public charging is an issue, and the price of public charging is an issue. We're rolling out, I think, one public charger every 29 minutes, I think I'm right in saying. So we've got to roll more of them out, more competition. Obviously that VAT issue is something we continue to look at. It's got to make financial sense for people. I think it does broadly make financial sense, but there's obviously quite a big mismatch between charging at home and what happens at public charging points. It's a good point.
Second one. Carbon capture and storage. We can absolutely agree that in any kind of future energy scenario, we will need some degree of carbon capture. But I think something that frustrates our audience is that it seems like we hear more about the carbon capture and less about some of this rapid deployment of renewable projects. Is this a way of keeping the fossil fuel lobby happy?
That's sort of not the way I think about it. I mean, there's no bigger enthusiasts than me for offshore wind, onshore wind, solar. We've consented more nationally significant solar in the last 11 months than the last government did in 14 years, a lot more. all of the renewable technologies. I think carbon capture, though, actually what it gives you, it's two things. One, for industry, it enables them to decarbonize. I was talking to somebody from the cement industry who's actually got a big carbon capture sort of cluster that he's overseeing, which is crucial for the cement industry. You know, there's no real way for cement to decarbonize without carbon capture. The second thing it does is think about gas-fired power stations. What they give you is dispatchable power, so that you can turn them on and off. What carbon capture gives you is that dispatchable power in a low carbon way. And it's not about displacing renewables, it's about having a backup, if you like, in the system, which you can turn on and off in a way that is decarbonized. And you know, people talk about these big numbers, 21 billion over 20 years and so on. Compared to the amount that is going into renewables, it's much, much less. You know, renewables is the thing that is really going to be the backbone of the system. This is a really, really important supplement to the system, support to the system, but the core, the real heart of our system is going to be renewables alongside nuclear.
I mean, it's really interesting because I think it's especially important to note those hard-to-abate industries for whom it might be their only choice. And of course, this is being explored at the same time as dispatchable power from grid-scale storage as well. Okay,
which is also very exciting. I mean, I think that's what's so exciting about this area, and presumably you find this in the podcast. You know, long duration storage, batteries, potentially tidal. You know, there's just such a range here, and I sort of think you need all of them.
Yeah, and I suppose that's the sort of fundamental shift that we're exploring. It is this range of solutions, and loads of different things, and there isn't a silver bullet, and that's harder for people who are less engaged with this topic to maybe get their head around. Okay, so I think I want to turn this conversation towards how we bring everyone along on this journey, because no question, people who can see those future targets of lower energy bills, clean power, jobs, it sounds fantastic. But there are others who are like, retrofits are messy and it's an inconvenience and it's a faff and it's expensive. And equally, I was quite shocked by this, and this is really going to expose which news outlets I'm reading. But you've had a lot of abuse.
Yes.
The articles, which primarily appear in The Sun, The Daily Mail, and The Daily Telegraph.
They love me, really.
Well, they've labelled you as all sorts of terrible things. A net zero zealot with a messianic devotion to climate action with calls for your removal. A, how does that make you feel? And B, how can we take the heat out of this discussion and depoliticise this?
Such a good question. I mean, on how does it make me feel? I don't care, really. I think if you try and make change happen in politics or in life, you get people who don't agree with you, and that's so be it. I do care about the climate cause. I also care about getting people lower bills and energy security, and I am so struck by the good jobs we can create. How do we take the heat out of it is a harder question. I think my view is sort of climate first, party second. In other words, I like working with people from all political parties. You know, I'd praise Theresa May for having put net zero into law. Alok Sharma, who was a really good friend of mine, he was I was shadowing him, but he was the president of COP26. I think he did a really great job, and he's an incredibly good guy. I was with Greg Clark last night as part of our industrial strategy. He shadowed me and was the business secretary under the last Conservative government. So I want to reach out to as many people as possible across the political spectrum. I think in a way, though, in the end, the way this works is partly through the power of ordinary people passing on the example. What's going to make heat pumps popular? Your neighbour having one and thinking, oh, it really works quite well for me.
And you have your heating on all day.
And,
how lovely.
and what's made solar successful? Solar panels on rooftops. People saying, it's quite good. It just cuts my bill. And so I think that that power of example, and I'm not just saying this, but I think the power of your listeners and viewers I think climate can make people feel quite powerless, but I think every person in their own way has power. Just talking to your friends and neighbours about it and saying, well, actually, it's been really good for me. It's not just good because it's good for future generations or my kids or nephews or nieces, but it's actually good because it's saved me money. Or it's creating jobs, or, you know, I've got a better quality of life, or it's cleaning up the air. You know, all of those things. I think what's going to win this is partly word of mouth.
Yeah.
And the sort of tide of people saying it's been good. I've got a heat pump. You know, it's to be honest, lots of people said, oh, well, you know, it won't work and blah blah blah, and it's been really good. Yeah. You know, heat pump and battery. You know, I think the other thing is here empowerment. You know, we're the people who want to empower people with a battery, a heat pump, solar panels. You know, to be able to control their energy bills when they use energy, all of those things.
In all of this, anecdote is really, really important, and continuing that conversation. Yeah. So, 2 questions, and I promise you can go back today. Fine. For anyone who's listening who maybe has, how should I describe someone? A Sun or Daily Mail reading friend. Sure. What would you say to them to pass on to their Sun or Daily Mail reading friend?
I think to understand that when change happens, people can be anxious about it, but to say, you know, don't believe the people who tell you that somehow this clean energy thing is bad for people. It is about people having better lives. It's about people having better lives today, and it's about doing the right thing for future generations tomorrow. And it's as simple, and if you want to know what it means, a solar panel on your rooftop cutting your energy bills, who could possibly object to that?
Yeah. Well, I think that is a perfect note to end on. I feel we need to continue this conversation because I've not asked you about supply chains in China. I've not asked you about, you know, various other bits to do with electric vehicles, but we will have to leave it there. But thank you so much for giving up your afternoon.
It's been great to be on it, and thank you for what you're doing and your listeners and viewers through your podcast, because, you know, the thing I feel most of all as a politician is that it's the power of ordinary people to change things. That's what has happened in history, and I think that's what's going to happen on this issue.
Oh, well, we're very grateful to, honestly, our incredibly engaged and motivated audience. So
thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. That is all that we have time for today. As I said at the beginning of this episode, we've probably generated more questions than we provided answers, so we will have to follow up with a round 2, I think. But before you go, if you could do us the honour of liking, subscribing, or letting us know what you think in the comments, or all of the above, it is so valuable. We so appreciate it. It really does ensure that we can keep on telling the important stories in this clean energy transition. But that's it. If you have been, thank you for listening and watching. We're really excited to partner with Duracell Energy to showcase their amazing renewable energy solutions. If you want to reduce your energy bills and join the renewable energy transition, installing home battery storage and solar panels at home is a great way to start. Duracell Energy's ecosystem of products typically partners with solar panels, but they can be just as effective without it, particularly for electric vehicle owners or anyone looking to take control of their energy. And with Duracell Energy's Platinum Homeowner offer, viewers can get a custom service that pairs you with top quality products and the best installers in your area. Duracell Energy's batteries, inverters and EV chargers work together on one easy-to-use app. With features like dynamic tariff integration and grid services, you'll be able to maximise your return. Ready to get started? You can get your quote today. And don't forget, we're also giving away a Duracell Energy Bunny in every episode. Just answer the question about Fully Charged by following the link in the description. Good luck!